Lawyers on the Line is brought to you by Falsani, Balmer, Peterson, Quinn, and Beyer. For nearly 40 years, answering the Northland's toughest legal questions, helping you understand where you stand. Falsani, Balmer, Peterson, Quinn, and Beyer.
Good evening, and welcome to Lawyers on the Line. I'm Sean Quinn, a partner at Falsani, Balmer, Peterson, Quinn, and Beyer Law Firm, and this evening's moderator. Tonight we're talking about basic business law. Business owners are required to comply with various state, federal, and administrative laws and regulations, and that makes starting, running, and closing down a business much more complicated than you might think. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists this evening. We have Greg Gilbert of Gilbert Law Office, Yvonne Novak of the Law Office of Yvonne Novak, and Joe Ferguson of the Hamp-Freedy Law Firm. Greg, Yvonne, and Joe will respond to your questions about basic business law matters. Please call us at 218-788-2844, or if that's long distance for call our toll-free line at 1-877-307-8762. All right, here we are, basic business law. I'll start with an easy one for you, Greg.
Okay.
What's an LLC?
LLC, Limited Liability Company. And most people are familiar with the three basic forms of business entities: sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. And about 15, 20 years, they came up with a fourth kind of entity called a limited liability company. And the idea is supposed to be a hybrid between the corporation and the partnership. Give you the protection of a corporation and the tax flexibility of a partnership. But the interesting thing is that last year there were 35,000 business entities filed in the state of Minnesota, and 30,000 of those were LLCs. So it's become kind of the go-to business entity lately.
Okay, well, Yvonne, Greg mentioned corporations. One of the types of corporations we hear of are S corporations. What's a corporation versus an S corporation?
Well, a C corporation is...
Oh, a C corporation too,
yes,
okay. So we got
a C
two.
corporation is the type of corporation where it's a big corporation and they end up paying taxes at the corporate level and also at the individual shareholder level. Versus like the S corporation, it's a pass-through entity, similar to an LLC, in that the profits of the corporation flow right onto the shareholder's tax return and they pay the taxes that way.
As an individual person, as opposed to the
Correct.
corporation.
Yes.
Okay. So then, Joe, going to you, Greg talked about LLCs, Yvonne talked about these S corporations. For a small business owner, how does one choose between which one you want to go with?
For a small business, I would recommend an LLC. They provide a variety of opportunities for governance. You can have individuals who own the rights to govern and other individuals who own the rights to take the profits, and they can be in different proportion of ownership. And they also give you the opportunity to have other entities as shareholders or members of the LLC. In other words, you could have a C Corp or an S Corp be a member of an LLC. C corporations, you can have other entities. S corporations, you can't unless it's a qualified trust.
Okay. So, and these are the types of things that you would discuss with your client in deciding which way to go, presumably.
Absolutely, okay. Yeah. And in a number of cases, an LLC can be determined as, we call them a tax disregarded entity. In other words, if it's a single purpose LLC with a single member, one person as the member, they can disregard that for tax purposes and report it on their 1040. They don't have to file a separate partnership return for the LLC.
Okay, so they can treat their income as the owner of the business just like they were an employee.
Correct.
Okay.
So, self-employed, yeah.
So then, Greg, I'm a small business owner. I'm thinking about doing this. Why do I need a lawyer to do this?
Well, the process
Or do I
has-
need a lawyer? Maybe would be the better question.
What I find is that people do a lot of research now on the internet, and they read a lot of materials, and they pick up pieces here and there, but there's really not a source where you can tie them all together. So people will come to see me and they'll say, well, I read this and I read this, but it really helps me to be able to talk to an attorney that can answer my questions I've got in these particular areas, yet wrap it all together for me and do the documents. So really what lawyers in this business do primarily is, that legal documents are not that difficult or cumbersome, but what they really do is the education part and let them know, here's your business entity, here are the options, here's the pros and cons, and then the business owner can kind of take it from there.
All right. Well, Yvonne, going a little bit further than what Greg mentioned, he described how people come to him. I looked on the internet. I looked at this. There's of course these internet services that provide sort of basic outlines for how to start a business, how to run a business. Aren't they going to answer those questions? Geez, I don't have to pay an expensive lawyer. I can give $99 to this internet company.
Well, the problem with the internet companies is the internet can't ask you the questions that we use to determine what is the best entity for you. And even if they do have basic questions, they don't necessarily address the state-specific questions. I was looking today at one site and it provided actually inaccurate legal advice for Minnesota.
That might be accurate in a different state, wherever.
It might be, but it wasn't accurate in Minnesota, and if someone relying on that would have a problem.
Okay. So best to have one-on-one with a lawyer answering your questions about your thing.
Correct.
Okay. So then, Joe, what about these documents that need to be filed? Who are you filing it with? What are you doing? Why are you doing it?
That's a good segue into one of my comments. I always tell prospective clients that I could probably perform an appendectomy on myself with a good razor and a mirror, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I had a lady come in last week, and she was confused. She thought that she had registered the name of her business with the Secretary of State's office. I looked it up. No, she had actually filed an LLC, unbeknownst to her. She had actually filled out the paperwork online with the Secretary of State's office and created an LLC. She then went on the IRS site and obtained a federal employer identification number, thinking that she needed that. Had she not come to see me, next year, the IRS would have been looking for a partnership return to have been filed for that LLC. And this is one of the problems. The Secretary of State's office has made it very easy to file articles of organization, which is the basic document for the LLC. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State's form does not have a number of indemnification provisions that we typically put in those articles of organization if you go to a lawyer. And they make the LLCs perpetual in term so that they go on forever, and sometimes you don't want that. So we
now,
file the...
Let me interrupt you. So
Yeah.
you're talking about articles of
Organization.
and I suppose for a corporation that's articles of
Of
incorporation.
incorporation, and for a partnership, it's articles of partnership.
Okay, and these are filed with the Secretary of State.
That's correct. And then there are two other documents that you have the clients, depending on how many members there are, on operating agreement, which are essentially the bylaws, and what we call a member control agreement, which dictates how people buy in and get bought out of the LLC.
Okay, and these all have to be filed with the Secretary of State?
No, only the articles
Only
of
the
organization.
articles, okay.
Right.
Now, what about, Greg, I'll go to you. What about a lot of companies and boards, they keep minutes, book of minutes or minutes of meetings, things like that. What kind of documents are these from a legal perspective, and are they necessary? What do you have to do with them?
It's very important. We talked about filing the articles of organization with the Secretary of State's office, and many people do that, and then they consider they're done. Well, what happens then is, 3 or 4 or 5 years from that point, there may be a creditor or the IRS, or the issue of whether or not they're incorporated comes up. And what they find is that in order to maintain your corporate status, owners have to observe certain formalities. And that's keeping a minute book, issue shares, keep minutes of meetings, have meetings, keep minutes of those meetings, keep a track. Because what you're really trying to do is when you file your entity with the Secretary of State's office, you're kind of a fictitious, vague entity, and you need to add meat and bones to that entity, and you do that by keeping minutes, transferring property into the LLC, and that becomes important as the corporation or LLC moves along.
Okay. But these are internal documents.
Yes,
Okay.
none of those are filed, they're for your records.
Okay. And I've already got an excellent note that I didn't catch on the teleprompter at the beginning. Joe is with the Johnson Killen law firm. I think I said Hamp-Freedy. So I apologize to both law firms.
Particularly Hamp-Freedy.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
It's bad me. All right, Yvonne, we got a question from Grand Marais. How difficult and how expensive, and I don't know if that means legal expense or overall expense, maybe both, would it be to convert an S corporation into an LLC?
That's a good question.
It looked like it.
Because it really depends on how complex the business has already been established, whether we've already agreed on the type of things that need to be agreed upon when you're determining how somebody's going to get in or out of the business. It's basically going to be about the same cost as what forming a new corporation would be.
Is it a conversion, or is it just basically ending one and starting another?
You can convert. I believe it's easier to actually end one and start the other.
Okay. All right. And Joe, we have a question from Hayward. Individuals, as they want to be a self-employed interior painter, and I don't know if the type of business necessarily is relevant, but maybe it is. No other employees. How does this person go about setting up their own business? Presumably an LLC, or that seems to be the way to go nowadays.
I would recommend that individual look at an LLC, a single-member LLC. Under a single-member LLC, he could report all of the income on his 1040 Schedule C. He would not have to file a separate return for the LLC, and he would be able to afford himself of the protection of the LLC, provided he contracted in the name of the LLC. If somebody's house burned down, for instance, he used kerosene or whatever instead of paint, all they could get would be the assets of the LLC. I also remind clients that you never can buy too much insurance, because when you're buying insurance for your business, you're buying a legal defense, which we all know is pretty expensive. So make certain that if you incorporate your business or have an LLC as your business, that you have an insurance policy that covers the LLC.
In addition to yourself.
In addition to yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to cover one other thing. There are a lot of issues that arise when we form LLCs and corporations where the advice of a certified public accountant is invaluable. It's absolutely invaluable. They can direct you, depending on the type of business you're in. And the other thing is, the most important document that you can have in either a corporation, an LLC, or a partnership is the document that controls how people buy in and get bought out. How do you value the interest, whether they're shares, membership interest, or partnership interest? How those are valued, and how you
transferred.
Get in and get out.
Yeah.
In the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen so much litigation involving partners who don't have a document like that, and they end up in court spending a small fortune when they could have resolved those issues on an annual basis. All the more reason to have an annual meeting to value the shares of stock.
Going back to what Greg said about the
Exactly.
importance of the documents, also the importance of the meetings.
Exactly.
Now, Greg, Joe talked about how the LLC can protect a person in case they protect their personal assets from being taken away if something bad happens with the company. How does that work? How does a corporation or an LLC protect the personal assets of the owners or the shareholders?
Well, done properly, you'll have two entities. You'll have your LLC entity and your individual that are behind the entity. The individual owns stock in the entity, but is not the entity itself. So if there's a liability issue, what you would like to have happen would be the creditors then come against the entity, LLC entity, and not the owner. That way, they can't, with some exceptions, of course, they normally can't, hit the owner's personal checking account. They can't go after the owner's personal assets. They're limited to going against the LLC's assets, and in the cases where there's a lot of debt, the LLC may just be overwhelmed and just be allowed to die away with no ability to collect, where that might be true of the individual.
Okay, and I suppose then that's very important insofar as when the owner of the LLC is doing business, that they're doing business as the LLC as opposed to individual.
That's right, and there's a number of formalities that the owner needs to observe: use of the name, keeping records, making sure that they're holding themselves out as an LLC, and that's one of the reasons you come and see a lawyer, because you file the articles and people say, well, we're all done. But with a lawyer can explain to the person, what these formalities are, how to efficiently apply them to make sure that 5 years from now, as well as right now, the person is covered.
Okay, so a little bit of money spent early on saves a lot
Save
of
an
trouble.
awful lot later on, let me tell you.
All right, Yvonne, let's talk a little bit something different. When somebody is starting a business, okay, I'm going to see a lawyer, I'm going to decide do you actually have to have a business plan as well?
You don't need a business plan to meet with a lawyer, but it's a really good idea to go through the business planning process so you focus on what's important for the business, what are your goals, how do you plan on achieving them, and there's a number of nonprofit agencies in town that will help you make a business plan so that you can have that outline for how to run your business. So it's not required to open up the business, it's just recommended.
Okay, so it's just smart, this all sounds like just really smart planning for all these things we've been talking about for the most part.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Joe, sometimes people, I shouldn't say people, we hear of individual companies that, well, they're incorporated, they're here, but they're incorporated in different states. What factors does somebody, maybe a smaller business, decide, well, I want to be an S corporation or a C corp, well, maybe C doesn't apply, but an S corporation, but I don't want to be a Minnesota S corporation, I want to be a South Dakota S corporation. Why do they do that? How do they go about doing that?
We see a lot of Delaware corporations.
Right.
The reason for that is that under the laws of the state of Delaware, minority shareholders have no rights whatsoever. None. So if you own less than 50% of the shares of stock in a company in Delaware, you have no rights. Most other states that I'm aware of provide minority shareholders with rights. So if you're a minority shareholder and you don't like the way the company is being managed, you can file a suit in Minnesota, you can file it under the Business Corporation Act. In Wisconsin, the same thing, and you can go to court and say, Your Honor, the majority shareholders here are wasting the assets of the corporation, they're doing illegal things, I need somebody to listen to me. You can't do that in Delaware. In Minnesota, we typically advise clients to incorporate their business in the state where their principal office is going to be and where their principal business is going to be. For instance, if you're a Minnesota corporation, Minnesota LLC, Minnesota partnership, you can do business in any other state in the United States. You will probably have to have that business qualified to do business in the state. For instance, in Wisconsin, you take a certified copy of the Articles of Organization, a partnership or organization, and you file them with the Department of Financial Institutions in Wisconsin. And you get a certificate to do business in the state of Wisconsin. You get
As a Minnesota corporation.
Right. You get a sales tax number and all that stuff. And you may owe corporate taxes in both states, but we have reciprocity. If you pay X number of taxes in Wisconsin, they're credited against Minnesota, vice versa.
Okay. Now, Greg, what about buy-sell agreements? What are those?
Joe referred earlier to operating agreements and agreements between unrelated partners. If you're unrelated partners in a business, unrelated shareholders, unrelated members of an LLC, there are a number of issues that really you should look at when you're starting up the business. What happens if one of the partner leaves? What happens if one of the partners dies? What happens if there are all a host of other issues? Because if you don't really come up with an agreement early on and those issues are left open and there is a dispute or something happens down the road, that's where you get your lawsuits. So what a buy-sell agreement, it's part of this operating agreement or member control agreement, which essentially gives the plan if a partner leaves or wants to be bought out, it gives a formula for doing that. And there are several options. Some people say, well, the buyout price is an appraised value. Some documents say, well, every year the partners will get together and determine what the buyout price is, and they'll use different standards. But it's always a good idea when you have people that are not related, that are bringing money into a business association, that they discuss these terms and figure out what they're going to do in case the problems come up and have an answer for it. And that's what lawyers do. I mean, that's what we have ability to do that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Anticipate the problems before they
Yes.
happen. Okay. And you said people who are not related. I suppose this happens with people who are related too.
I think it does too.
Okay. Now, Yvonne, you got a small business, everything's okay, and now you want to wrap it up. How does one go about wrapping up a business?
There's a process for dissolving a business in the state of Minnesota, which involves notifying the Secretary of State, notifying your creditors via direct mail and then publication. And then after a certain period of time, you can actually close the business. You'd actually need to notify the Department of Revenue and the IRS also.
Okay, so there's some form work to do there too.
Yes.
Okay. Joe, to you, change subjects real quick. What's a trademark?
Well, boy,
And you only got about
okay.
2 minutes.
All right, a trademark would be, for instance, on that coffee cup,
Okay.
WDSE, WRPT. That's a logo, could be a trademark. And you can do one or two things with those trademarks and logos. You can file them with the state of Minnesota, and that trademark would be protected in the state of Minnesota, nowhere else. Or you can file the trademark with the United States Patent and Trademark Office in Washington, D.C., which is a little more complicated, a little more costly, but that trademark would then be protected in the entire United States.
And when you say protected, it means basically no other business can use it, but if they do, you can go to court to stop
That's
it.
correct. You can get an injunction against them. You can collect attorney's fees, all sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the difference between, say, a trademark and a copyright? Just a different type of word for the same thing?
Copyrights are incredibly easy to register. You simply put a little C with a circle on it, and it's copyrighted. Okay.
Okay.
I know that sounds almost too
So I
good to
take
be
this
true.
piece of paper that
That's
I've written
correct.
on and I do that, I've now copyrighted it.
Right. Now, once again, you can go further than that and protect that with registration, and be able to collect attorney's fees and damages if anybody uses that product.
Okay.
That written product. Yeah.
All right. Greg, slightly different question, totally different topic here. The UMD Small Business Center, what is that?
That is a resource, Sean, that's located down in the Technology Village building in downtown Duluth. And they have counselors, and people go there, and what their counselors will do is give people suggestions on developing a business plan, giving them networks where they can go to Duluth to try certain things. And it's a tremendous resource, and it's so fun because I've been doing this since the 1980s, and we may have done just a few business developments through the 80s and maybe into the 90s, but now it's just absolutely on fire. They are so busy down there. There are so many people that are going into business for themselves that those resources are just becoming wildly more important, and it's something that people should look into when they're looking at starting up a business. But it is more of a business plan rather than the legal stuff.
All right, so I go there, they give me a lot of business advice. I'm still going to want to see a lawyer to make sure
That's
I do these
correct.
documents correct and all the buying in and buying out kind of things
That's correct.
to do. Okay, well, I guess that's it. That's all the time we have. Remember, you can watch our show again online at www.wdse.org, or at www.duluthtriallawyers.com. Please join us next week and we'll talk about Social Security. I'd like to thank our panelists for their expertise this evening and thank you for watching. I'm Sean Quinn. Good night. Okay. What would you like to know about Social Security? We'll be taking your questions about eligibility requirements, medical evidence, appeal procedures, vocational evaluations, and more on the next Lawyers on the Line, Thursday night at 7:30 on PBS North. Boom. What's that? Oh, is it crooked? Is that better?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Boy, that half hour goes really fast when you're scrambling to get here at the last second. What would you like to know about Social Security? We'll be taking your questions about eligibility requirements, medical evidence, appeal procedures, vocational evaluations, and more on the next Lawyers on the Line, Thursday night at 7:30 on PBS North.